Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar this evening, which is Precision Parasite Control and Integrating Technology. My name's Fiona Kenyon from the Moredun Research Institute. I'm a principal investigator at Moredun, interested in roundworm control, and I'm also the project lead for the Smartsheet project, which is what we're going to really tell you about tonight. So we're really excited to have you here. And we're going to be discussing wormer resistance and how we can use technology and EID technology to be able to help that. This is a highly collaborative project. It's Innovate UK funded, and we have a range of different specialists from drug companies, technology companies, software specialists, farm advisors. And you're going to hear from many of us tonight explaining what we've done in the different roles in the project. But I'd like to pass you over to Emily Gascoigne, who has been responsible for organising these webinars, and she's just going to explain a bit about how the webinars are going to run. So I hope you will enjoy it. Thank you.
Welcome everybody to the webinar this evening. Just a few housekeeping things. So there's not going to be an opportunity for Q&As, question and answers throughout the sessions. But if you scroll to the bottom of your screen, hopefully the bar pops up along the bottom and there's a Q&A option. As we go through, if there's any questions that you have, feel free to type them in there as they come to you, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end. In the interest of time, I'll ask the speakers to briefly introduce themselves this evening. And yeah, thank you very much and hope you enjoy the webinar. So I'll hand over to our first hosts this evening, Leslie Stubbings and Matt Colston.
So yeah, my name's Matt. I'm one of the technical consultants, ruminant technical service vets at Elanco Animal Health, and I was involved in this project as one of the farm advisors. So I went out on farm and tried to make things work. As an introduction to this, we just thought we'd do a revision of worms and anthelmintic resistance and why it's such a problem. So I've got a few slides here. The data we have with the surveys that have been done have shown that where we look for it, we will usually find some degree of wormer resistance on pretty much every farm where we look for it. Now, just to put this in perspective, this isn't saying we get treatment failures. This is where we find a reduction of less than 95% in the worm egg count after treatment. So it's not something that you'll see unless you're looking for it. But the stats from the last large-scale survey that was done, which was back in 2015, are quite frightening. So on 94% of farms, we found some degree of white drench resistance. On 68% of farms, we found some degree of resistance to the group 2 levamisole drugs. On 51% of farms, we found resistance to ivermectins, and on nearly 20% of farms, we found resistance to moxidectin as well. So that doesn't look very good, but what's even worse is when you start looking at how many farms had multiple resistance. We only found 2% of farms with no detectable resistance, 21% with resistance to a single active, 34% with resistance to 2 actives, another 28% with resistance to 3 actives, and a further 15% had resistance to the 3 actives and moxidectin. So bearing that in mind, we think, well, why aren't more people concerned about it? We know it's there. We know that when we look for it, we find it. Why aren't things moving more quickly in the way that we manage to control worms on our farms? So at Elanco, we did a bit of market research. And the first question we asked was, are your wormers working okay? And 85% of the people who answered, I think it was about 380 people included in the survey, 85% scored them 8, 9, or 10 out of 10 as to whether their wormers were working as well as they had always done. Only 19% said they'd noticed a decline in the efficacy of wormers over the years, which, when we know that resistance is there, is a bit surprising. But when we asked these people, they understood that it was down to resistance in the worms. So then we asked, how do you determine whether a wormer treatment has been effective or not? And most people go on look or condition. And this is the main yardstick for judging whether wormer efficacy is good, rather than checking to see what's been left behind. And that brings us back to the conclusion that this isn't an invisible problem unless you're testing and looking for it. And people don't tend to try and tackle a problem they can't see. So that's where we got to on that. So I think on that note, I'll now hand over to Leslie to talk a little bit more about what we can do about it.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks very much. So I'm Leslie Stubbings, and I'm just going to take this on a little bit now to sort of segue into what the other guys are going to talk about, the project. So I'm a sheep consultant. I haven't quite got my total Scops hat on tonight, which is probably what most people will hear me talking about most of the time. But in this project, I've been doing my day job, which is actually being a sheep consultant and being one of the farm advisors on the project. So working with 4 farmers on the project. So just picking up from what Matt was saying then, it's pretty obvious whenever we do this survey work that farmers know resistance is a problem. I think we've passed that barrier now. Sure, I know worm resistance is a problem around the country, but my wormers are still working. And that's really what was coming out of the survey work that Matt was talking about there. So the problem we've got as advisors, of course, is to try and help them understand that it is their problem on their farm, and that actually early action is how they're going to be able to slow down the development of resistance and keep wormers working and keep their worm control effective for longer. So the question is, why is that? If we can understand a bit more about why it is that farmers don't seem to understand it's their problem at an early stage, then we can help them to make that change. So many of you, I'm sure, will have seen this graph before. Along the bottom, we've got efficacy of the anthelmintic. Clearly, as we get into that red zone at the bottom, where we're killing 50% or less of the adult worms, of worms generally that are in the animal, it's pretty obvious to the farmer once he gets to that stage that performance is dropping off. And usually one of the classic signs is, oh, well, I've had to worm my lambs every 2 weeks because every 3 or 4 weeks isn't working. It's that sort of throwaway comment that really makes you raise your eyebrows. But the point is that at the top here, when we talk about detecting the beginning of resistance on a farm, we can detect it at this level, at the 95% level if we're doing FECRT, or 90% if it's more of a drench efficacy. So we're starting to detect it at a much earlier stage. And what that means is that we as advisors can start to think about avoiding them having a reducing performance as they slip down this slippery slope. So that's point number 1, is that if we can get them to do some testing, and here, we're doing a post-drench efficacy test. By doing that, A, we're getting in some information as to whereabouts they are on that graph, and B, we're also beginning to make some inroads into the performance and avoiding a performance drop. So I'm sure you're all familiar with this, but let's say we had a pre-drench, and I think you do need to do a pre-drench test to find out A, whether or not they should have wormed in the first place, and B, what the pre-drench efficacy eggs per gram are. Drench them. I see sometimes I do the job. Then we go back in 7 or 14 days later, depending on whether it's a 2LV at 7 or the others at 14, and do a second fecal egg count. And what we're looking for there on a simple drench efficacy test is a greater than 90% reduction. Greater than 95 is great, it's fantastic, but if it's being done on a farm, then really, the accuracy is going to be a little bit fuzzy at times. But that's what we're looking for. And that gives us a really good lead into an early warning that where they are. And as those of you who understand anything about how resistance develops, the earlier we act when the frequency of resistant worms, resistant alleles is lowest in the population, the more effect that we can have in slowing it down. So if you just go back to this graph then, having done that, and let's say we're starting to establish on a farm where we are, the next thing is we've got to start thinking about strategies that allow us to keep the efficacy of the drugs that are still working quite well up to the top end and avoid them slipping down into this slippery red zone, which they would do if we kept putting selection pressure on. Now, there's lots of things that we can do, but one of the things that's really important is to start to reduce our reliance on anthelmintics, in the sense that it's as little as possible, but as much as is required approach. And one of the really important parts of that approach now is TST, targeted strategic treatments, because what we're trying to do is to target those animals that need to be treated and not treat those animals that don't. And tonight we're talking about lambs, but of course that applies to ewes as well, which is where we're trying to get to. So that really leads me into this project and how this project is linking with the technology available to allow us to do that with lambs and be accurate in terms of which lambs we choose to trench and which ones we don't. So, avoiding this situation where people are waiting for clinical signs. Of course, we don't want that, and we don't want them to get that because the resistance has got to the point where the anthelmintics aren't working. But to start to measure performance and use that and use the technology that we have available so that we can choose the right animals. So we've got a flock there of using lambs. The lambs come in, instead of going in and just treating all of them, can we, using the technology, what we know about how well they're growing, choose those that are falling down below the line in terms of what our expectation is. And you'll hear from the guys later, the algorithm looks at what's available food-wise as well, and then start to look at, red one gets treated because it's not performed as well as it should, the blue one doesn't, and we can actually reduce our reliance on anthelmintics that way. So that's really the basis of and what we're trying to do with this. Treat the animals we need to and not the animals that we don't need to in an accurate way that's backed up with science and the technology. Just one final slide as well, because this is obviously a topic that people are talking about now, and that is not only the exposure of the worm population and encouraging this in refugia population that's not exposed to the anthelmintic, but we can also now start thinking about this as being a useful technique in order to avoid exposure of dung fauna as well, which is something which is quite high on some people's agendas, all of our agendas actually, and the TST approach allows us to start to bring that in as well. So thank you. I'm going to hand over to Fee now, who's going to, I think, take us back into more of the science.
Thanks, Leslie. Yes, so we're now going to segue back into some of the science. So Claire and I are going to do a shared presentation. So just really discussing the science, if I can get it to move on. There we go. So Leslie's mentioned and Matt has mentioned the fact that we know anthelmintic resistance occurs in our worm population. It's actually in a vast majority of our worm populations here in the UK. But how does the worm resistance develop is actually influenced by a number of different factors. So for example, the parasite population size is huge in roundworms. It's absolutely massive. And that means that there are millions of individuals, and each individual is quite different from each other. So there's a big capacity in the worm population to be able to mutate and cope with new conditions and cope with pressures such as the application of drugs is considered a strong selection pressure. Also, as Leslie had shown with the graph of the slope coming down, the drug efficacy is also a factor that can determine how quickly drug resistance occurs. As Leslie said, if we're using a very effective drug, then that's actually really good and does not leave many resistant survivors. If we're using a more ineffective drug, then there are more worms that have survived that drug treatment and therefore can mate and produce more resistant offspring, because resistance is a genetic phenomenon. Some areas that we think could have impact, but we have less information about at the moment, is the fitness costs of being able to be resistant to the worm. So it could be that the worms that are resistant are only have an advantage of carrying those resistance genes when the drugs are present. But if we stop using those drugs, then those parasites actually will not be as fit as parasites that do not carry those resistance genes. So those are things that are kind of research has started to look at the moment. Also, the frequency of treatment can strongly determine how quickly resistance develops. So regular frequent treatments will lead to the development of resistance, whereas less frequent treatments will slow that down. And also the proportion of flock, or the proportion of the parasite population that is exposed to the drug, is also thought to be another driver. And this, you may have heard, has been called a refugia. And refugia is really considering the population that's not exposed to the drug. And we'll just try and explain that a little bit here. So looking at a flock of animals grazing, there are worms present in the gut of the animals. We have blue squiggles to signify susceptible worms and red squiggles to signify resistant worms. There's a mixture of these in the animals, but also on pasture. The amount of parasites on pasture can vary depending on the conditions. It can be as many as 95% of the worm population on pasture and only 5% in the host, but it can also swap under drought conditions where you would have the majority of the parasite population in the animals. Now, when you go in and treat with a wormer, then you knock out or you remove, you kill all the susceptible worms, leaving only the resistant ones, and they contaminate the pasture. And the idea of refugia is if you've got high refugia, you've got a lot of parasites that are not being exposed to the drugs, then on pasture, then you can see that the impact of these resistant parasites is fairly small. It's not going to change that parasite population quickly. However, if we have a situation where it's either clean grazing or after a drought situation, you can see that the impact of these resistant parasites onto pasture is greater. So the proportion of the parasite population that is resistant will build up over time. And that's what we're trying to avoid, is avoid having lots of resistant parasites present, because they will produce resistant offspring, and over time the proportion of resistant parasites in your pasture increases and could eventually lead to drug failure. So that's the theory of what happens in the parasites and on the field. And the idea behind targeted selected treatment that Leslie mentioned is this idea of just treating individual animals within a group rather than all. And we're trying to slow the development of wormer resistance by maintaining susceptible genes within the population. And we're also trying to dilute out the resistant worms that have survived treatment with susceptibles so that we reduce the chance of resistant worms breeding. Now, this sounds good in theory, but in practice, how would we go about doing this? Well, as Leslie mentioned, treating only those animals that need it, having this idea of refugia, so we leave some parasites unexposed to treatment. And this is fairly difficult in a sheep flock, is to decide who we're going to treat. An ideal indicator would be something that could be cost effective. It could give us an evidence-based animal side treatment decision so that it's quick and easy to use. And how do we go about deciding which animals, which lambs need to be treated? So this was some work that was started quite a number of years ago now with a colleague in New Zealand, Andy Greer, and we were interested to see if we could use weight gain as a proxy for production efficiency or how well the animals are growing. And we can actually do this from nutritional first principles, looking at the amount of food that's in front of the animals and some information about their size, so their initial weight. And we developed this, the model or a calculation, which we call the happy factor, to be able to predict short-term weight gain targets that would determine whether animals were performing well and therefore did not need treatment, or were not performing as well as we think they should have been able to, and therefore they would need a dose. And this allows us to set a minimum target weight gain by looking at, as I said, as the food available, and we can measure that. This is a grass pasture mass reader, but you can also do it, on a sward stick or a falling or rising plate reader. We need the initial lamb weight, so we need one weight beforehand so that we can look at the size of the animal. We use an electronic identified tags so that we can identify each animal, and an electronic weigh crate and an electronic weigh head, which we can then allow us to see the treatment decisions and therefore have a pen side decision. So to understand what we're trying to do here is we need to think of the fact that lambs vary in how well they perform over time. Each of these dots is a lamb that has received a wormer, and the lambs also vary in how they respond to that wormer treatment. So if we look along the horizontal axis, you can see that the efficiency value prior to treatment is how well the animals were growing before they received an antibiotic. And you can see that goes from performing really poorly, only about 20% of what we think they should be able to achieve theoretically, right up to 80 to 100%. So these animals at the 80 to 100 are actually growing really well. And if we look at what happens after treatment, so the 0 line here is the change in what's happened to those animals over time. So pre-treatment to post-treatment. The animals in this yellow box haven't really had a response to the antibiotic treatment, so they've not gained more weight as a result of the treatment. Whereas the animals that have been poorly performing have actually had a significant increase in performance post-treatment. And if we decide with the happy factor algorithm that we're going to treat animals at this black line here, then we can see that of those animals that we would decide not to treat, the majority of them would not have expected to have a response to treatment. So we're not expecting them to have a weight gain post-treatment after the drench. Of the animals that are below this 0.66 threshold, then of them, the majority of them would actually have been expected to respond positively to that treatment, to have a weight gain, an increase in efficiency post-treatment, and 88% of them would be thought to have that response. So when we're thinking about which animals we can afford not to treat, what we're trying to have is focus on these animals that are performing really well, because we know that they're not going to have a positive response. And that's a positive response in terms of farmers seeing a positive benefit in weight gain, but also for the animals, they're not having a positive response, and we want to focus the antibiotics that we do use on these animals that will have a positive response to that treatment. So again, this sounds great in theory, but does it actually work in practice? So we have done some studies at the Moredun Research Institute farm, which is a lowland farm just outside Edinburgh. And this was a long-term study that ran from 2006 to 2010, where we had 24 pairs of lambs in 4 different antibiotic treatment groups. And it ran over the grazing season for each of 6 years. The animals were kept within the same paddocks each of the years so that we could see the impact of the different treatment strategies on the parasite population and animal growth and things. And if we just look at the table here, the different groups that we had were a monthly treatment group where all animals in the group were treated every month. We compared that with our TST, where animals were only treated if they failed to reach this minimum weight target. We had a targeted group where animals were treated, all lambs were treated at weaning and 6 weeks post-weaning. And finally, a clinical sign group. So as Leslie was saying, if we allow animals to get to that clinical sign of scouring, we also looked at that. And you can see that the monthly versus the TST groups, we used less than half of the drench of the antibiotic group. Sorry, that my red dots moved, has moved. That should be covering this 36.2 here. Point is that we can reduce the amount of wormer by more than half, but we have no effect on weight gain. And that's shown that we can reduce wormer use and not have an impact in what is our production criteria in our finishing lamb population. We also know that if we wait until animals get a clinical signs of treatment, then although we use less wormer, we actually see a production penalty in terms of having reduced productivity and increased greenhouse gas emissions because we've been performing inefficiently. Looking at the terms of antibiotic efficacy, you can see the TST line here is in red, and that appears to maintain efficacy over time. The purple line here is if we treat animals each month, there's an immediate and consistent impact on drug efficacy, reducing remarkably quickly to low efficacy. I'm going to pass on now to Claire, and she'll tell you about some of the trials that she's conducted on the Hill and Mountain research station.
Thank you, Fiona. So I'm just quickly going to share my screen. So I'm Claire Morgan Davis. I work for Scotland Rural College, and as Fiona says, I'm based on the research farm near Crianlarich in the hills. So the idea here is Fiona and a team were testing the principle on a lowland farm, and we were keen to see if the threshold and the happy factor would also work on a hill farm. So we've tried 3-year studies on our research farm, which is roughly 2,000 hectares, and we had 900 ewes. We had 2 groups. The ewe were split between a conventional group, which was receiving anthelmintics based on fecal account, or the TST. And we did 3 TST treatment over the summer. So at marking in June, all the lamb were receiving a standard dose and were being weighed, as Fiona was saying. But then at shearing, weaning, and post-weaning, that's when every month we were subjecting the lamb to the happy factor and the targeted selective treatment. So what does it mean in practice? So 2 weeks before we did the TST treatment, we were measuring the grass biomass, and we were using a grass meter, and or we were using also the AgriIgnite app, which Linda and Colin will talk a bit more about in the next presentation. So we're just measuring the grass amount. Then we would upload the lamb weight collected from the previous event into the AgriIgnite platform. And the AgriIgnite platform, which contains the happy factor, calculates the target weight for each lamb. And then it's downloaded onto the weighhead. And then we were using drafting codes into the true test to identify if we needed to dose the lamb, if the lamb was sad, or if he was happy, so it didn't need to dose. So on the day, and that's here to just show you what our setup at Kirkton. So on the day of the weighing, each lamb is individually weighed via the EID crate, and then we compare the actual weight with that target weight that was calculated by the happy factor. If the target weight is above the actual weight, then the animal didn't need a dose, and for example, would go into that number 1 pen. And then if the animal weight was below the target, then it will receive a dose. And we were also dosing on light, medium, and heavy lamb, which is we had these different pens here. And that's because we could use the technology, but that's roughly how we were doing it in practice. In terms of results, we were quite keen to see if that worked or not. And you can see the lamb weight in the graph here on the side. There was no difference between, so the green one is a TST and the hashed one is the conventional one. There was no difference in weight between the 2 groups of lamb over the 3 years period and the huge number of lamb we were looking at. So that was encouraging. And when we look at the proportion of lamb dosed, you can see that at shearing, so the first time we were doing the TST, hardly any lamb got a dose. And we were a bit worried, thinking, oh, something might not work. But actually, we stuck to our gun and we just carried on. And then at weaning and post-weaning, a bigger proportion of lamb needed a bit of treatment, but still well below 100%. In the control group, we were not at 100% because we were still treating the lamb based on their fecal account. But in total, between the 2 groups, we noticed nearly a reduction of 45% in the use of wormer, which is quite a huge amount. Then we did a bit of calculation in terms of cost, and we were noticing that we were, instead of spending nearly £73 for 100 lamb in the fecal account group, in the control group, we were only using £13 in the TST group. So far less wormer being used. And that also equates in labor saving because there is less lamb to dose physically on the day. So when we took all of that into account, we were finding kind of a £1.60 reduction per lamb if we use a TST. So when you've got a large flock, that start to make a big difference. So we thought that that approach of Fiona and his team at Morden was working on a hill farm. But the question now is, it's still a demonstration farm and a research farm. So can we really deploy it on real farm? And that's really the nub of that project. So I'm just going to stop sharing and pass it on over to Linda and Colin, who will really tell you what real farmers are thinking about the system.
Thank you, Claire. I'm Linda Owen. I work for 5Agri. So as Claire was saying, they've obviously a research farm. Fiat Morden, obviously a research farm. So how does that work in real life? So before the Smart Sheep project commenced, there was some testing on commercial farms, different breeds, different types of farm, different numbers of lambs. But in each of those groups, they were separating between lambs who were having the TST treatment and those that were taking their normal approach to. And what that showed was that over the different farms, there was actually no difference in the weight gain, but the lambs following the TST approach used less wormer. So you can see there that average reduction in treatments of between 0.74 and 1.04 of the lambs. I'm going to bring Colin in now because Colin was actually involved in some of this and he can explain a bit more in detail. Colin.
Okay, thank you, Linda. My name is Colin McPhail and I was one of the farm advisors on the project. But before we talk about the Smart Sheep project, I'll just briefly cover some of our experience. I've been involved in this since 2016-17 with the TST. I run the Monitor farm in the Lothians and we're just down the road from Fiona and the rest of the team at Morden. Now they came up to one of the meetings and mentioned TST to us and spoke about it and then asked if we'd be willing to run it on a commercial farm. So we agreed and we started to run the TST on some lambs in the summer, I think it was 2017. So what we done there was we tagged the lambs and weighed them after a certain number of weeks. And then we measured the grass and we took dung samples and we sent the weight, all the weight data, the dung samples and the grass measurements to Fiona at Morden. And they would crunch the numbers and then send back the data for us to upload back into the weighhead with the predicted weights. And the lambs would then be run through the scales again, bed them from 2 to 4 weeks following their first weight. And then they'd be given at that point, there's a predictive weight. And if they hit the predicted weight, they run on back to the field. And if they didn't, they were shed off and dozed. And that is, you'll hear us refer to the happy factor and happy and sad lambs. So the sad lambs get dozed and the happy lambs ran back to the field. So we've done that through the summer and it seemed to work well. And I think during that summer, I think we'd saved about 40% on dosing stuff and saved in some labour. So following that, then we're asked if by Fiona and the rest of the team would be interested in joining the Smart Sheep project. And as you can see in the screen, that was really to take it to the next stage and roll it out onto farms, and see if we could really improve the application of digital technology on the farms, validate the TST, and then do what we're doing tonight and share some of our knowledge and demonstrate the tools. So Linda, do you want to go on to the next slide? So as you will see here, we wanted coverage across the country. And as you see, I think we've done fairly well. And we have with 4 different farm advisors in different areas, so that we'd get some robust data, and also too would be able to really try and validate the TST across these farms. And we also wanted different types of different breeds and different scale as well of farming of sheep enterprises. So as you can see from this slide, I think we've covered most breeds really. From the farmers' perspective, it's been fantastic being part of the project. And we've learned an awful lot. Having the team that's on the project behind us and having all that knowledge has been tremendous. There have been some challenges with certainly technology and uploading and downloading technology and learning how to use it. But I think we'll cover that further on in the presentation. But I'll probably just hand back to Linda to explain how the technology that we've built and how we use it now to make the whole process much simpler on farm.
Thanks, Colin. So I suppose what Colin was describing there of having to send data back to a research institute to get your results to know whether or not you needed to dose a lamb just isn't practical on a commercial farm, nor is it practical to expect that somebody's going to sit and calculate the area of grass, stand with a calculator or an Excel spreadsheet at the side of the pen and do all the calculations to work it out. So what we did was, using the AgriIgnite platform, we identified all the fields that the farmer had, and we identified where the sheep were in those fields, and farmers were able to use an app on their phone. So every time they moved the sheep, they were able to input the level of dry matter in the field, and the system calculated how much food was available to the lambs that were in that group. And then over time, you were able to see the weight gain of the animals. You can see this is a happy sheep because it's got a little green smiley face. The sad sheep had red faces. So as described earlier, at the first weighing, we simply weighed them, and then the system calculates a minimum predicted weight. Now, that is not saying the weight that we expect the animals to get to. That is about saying this is the absolute minimum weight that this animal should gain. In most cases, the animals were gaining significantly more weight than what their minimum target weight was. But as Claire explained earlier, it was allowing us to work out who was happy and who was sad. So what we discovered is that by using the Datamars Wayhead and uploading and downloading to it and the drafting function, we were able to identify the animals that required treatment and didn't require treatment. Now, it may be that they had worms, but there may be other issues. So we were also still encouraging the farmers to look at other, to look at the lambs that were coming through SAD. So for example, in one of our test sites, every single lamb that ended up SAD had a foot problem. So it may have been wormers, or it may have been feet, or it could have been both linked together. So it's just to show you that it's basically just not meeting its target weight. And the farmers were then able to also note down which worming product they had given their sheep, so that they then had compliance with a medicine record should they have any inspections or need to go back and look at withdrawal periods, etc. So I suppose what the project has achieved with teething issues at times, it has taken research and made it work in a commercial environment. We have got this software now that does all the calculations at the side of the pen, so you're able to tell straight away whether you need to dose or not dose an animal. And it successfully treated only the sheep that actually needed treated, which encourages that whole targeted selected treatment approach, and ultimately ended up with reduced wormer usage. I think Phil maybe answer later on, but I don't know, that we're still crunching the numbers for this, but I think our estimation is that there's been between a 40 and 50% reduction in wormer use in the 16 farms that have been part of the test. So I'm going to hand over to Emily now for the next part of the session. Emily.
My name's Emily Gascoigne. I'm a sheep vet working in the Southwest, and I was one of the farm advisors participating in the project. Also co-hosting this session with me, I've got Matt. Hi, Matt. And I've also got Alison from
Oh, hi, everybody.
Alison from Datamars as well. So I actually wanted to put you guys to a bit of work this evening, if that was all right. So one of the reasons that I was really keen to participate in this project was because I, like the other farm advisors, working with commercial flocks on the ground every day with some equipment on farm and wanting to try and use it, learn a bit more about it to see if it could offer some help in terms of the real problem we're facing on farm with regards to anthelmintic resistance, but worms and their impact on production in general. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a series of questions. So hopefully this is going to pop up as a poll in a second. And so I would like to know which of the following you have on farm. So analog weigh scales, electronic weighead, tick all that apply, an EID reader in some capacity, so either a handheld, a wand, a panel reader, a software program, and if you have equipment with drafting facility. It doesn't necessarily need to be an auto drafter, but equipment that'll do drafting facility. So if I could ask you to answer that question now, tick all that apply. Lovely. So you can hopefully all see the results in front of us, lots of different equipment on farm, and that certainly reflects what I think all of us as farm advisors are seeing and working with on farm. Obviously multiple people having multiple bits of kit. And that is what's been reflected in other research and questions that have been done before. So this was a project, another sort of sister project alongside that asked similar questions, software well represented and wake rates of various types being used on farm. And you can see there's a wide range of other equipment that farmers were asked about, including EID worming guns, drones, cameras, virtual fences, etc. And when asked what tools farmers found most beneficial, wake rate and softwares and EID capability were right at the top of that list, which likely reflects what you're also seeing, what you're also using on farm. So question number 2, if everyone's ready. So what age do you EID tag your lambs? Bearing in mind there'll be lots of different types of farms involved this evening. So is it, only one choice please, shortly after birth, at marking, approximately 8 weeks of age, weaning, sometimes after weaning, or when they're about to leave the farm and you've decided to retain them? So hopefully everyone can see the answers, a range in practices across the audience. In order to participate in the project, flocks that participated, obviously their lambs needed to be tagged at the point of sort of recruitment, so when they wanted to start applying TST to the farms. I think there was a variation in the project as to when they were being done. I think lots of them were being done ASAP after birth, but it did range within the project. And the key thing I think to take home from it was that the sooner EID tags go into lambs, whatever is appropriate for your system, and the sooner that they go in, the more options we have in terms of data collection with an EID capacity. So, for those of you, well, for all of you, what are you currently using EID recording for? So if you're not using EID in a recording capacity, click answer 1, but again, tick all that apply. So are you currently using it for medicine records, movements, for weight analysis, pedigree information and parentage, or other usage? So if you're not using it in any capacity, pick option 1. And for everybody else, as many options as apply across the next. Okay, lovely. So you can see how everyone else in the audience is using EID currently. I think one of the things, just, you know, as part of the project, we obviously needed to record individual animal treatments as part, you know, and weight gains as part of the project. So all of those capabilities were sort of utilised as part of this, but just although our presentation here this evening is talking about growth rates and parasite management, this equipment has lots of different applications on farm depending on how you want to use it. And I think that's, again, one of the take-homes that came for all the participants in the project was the capability of the equipment we're working with is really very diverse. It's just getting to know and what it's capable of and getting the best out of the equipment we're using on farm. So, do you calibrate your weigh scales on farm? So, honest answers only, please. Yes, always. Yes, sometimes. No, and no, and I don't know how to do it. So, yes, always. Yes, sometimes. No, but you do know how to do it. Or no, and I don't know how to do it on farm. Okay, brilliant. Thank you for that. This was something that came out very, very early in the project, especially as there was a wide range of equipment that was being used. Some of the decision-making process required, or the accuracy of this equipment is really, really very important because we're making decisions about whether to treat or not these animals. So knowing how to calibrate the equipment is a really important place to start. To that end, one of the things that we've produced, and I'll signpost at the end, is some YouTube clips on how to calibrate equipment, including wake rates, but we'll come back to that at the end. Question 5. Does your weigh head have the ability to record weights? And are you recording it in other ways? So yes, if you link it to EID. No, but I record with a pen and paper. No, I don't record it anywhere. So yes, if you plug in EID, no, but you choose to record it with pen and paper, even if it's just some animals in a group, and no, and I don't record. Lovely, let's have a look at what the answers are. Okay, so some members of the audience got capability to link to EID. And I think one of the things sort of to share with everybody is, so a lot of this data takes time to record and effort as well. But with any data that's being recorded, the way to get the most out of it is the utilization of it. So sharing that or analyzing it is really very key to, you know, making decisions on farm. So for those of you that do have an electronic wayhead capable of recording, do you know how to download a weigh session? So I'll only answer this question if you have a wayhead that's capable of doing it. So no, you don't know how to record a weigh session. Yes, but I've never done it. Yes, I do sometimes, or yes, I always do it. Cool. So that's really interesting. So one of the fundamental things about making this project work was the ability to, or us being able to get data off the wayhead into the platform, but even outside of this project, being able to move the data about between yourself and your farm advisor, or yourself and perhaps your farm program, is really key in order to be able to start using that data. And I think actually those results, if we've just seen it, lots of you obviously are using it and downloading it, but quite a chunk of you aren't. And I think that's something that you know, is the scope to improve that, or get data flowing in order to make more use of it. But yeah, cool. Next question. Has your, again, honest answers only, has your farm vet or advisor ever asked you to share weighing data from your farm? Yes, and I did it. Yes, but I've yet to do it. Or no, they've never asked. Ooh, interesting, really interesting. And I'll give you all a fiver later, because that's what I was, well, it's not what I was hoping you were all going to say. Yes, and I did, you all get gold stars, but no, and they've never asked. Well, we've got the reason for the difference between the two sessions, both tonight and we've got advisors tomorrow, is that I'm hoping to lay the gauntlet down for our advisors that are working with us, our flocks, because I think we've got to get data flowing. And whilst we've used it in quite a cool way in this project, actually just being able to use some of those weigh date sessions, it fundamentally is really important to facilitating our parasite management. So be receptive to your advisor when they ask for it. But yeah, you've just challenged me to get them all asking for it tomorrow. So thank you for an honest answer. And last question, which of the following statements most accurately describes you? So number one, this is all very interesting, but EID is not for me at this time. Number two, I've not got any equipment on farm, but I want to learn more. 3, I have some equipment, but I want to be shown more how to get more from it. Option 4 is I have equipment and I can use it, but there's always more to learn. And the last option is I'm already a whiz with EID. So which of these statements most accurately describes you? Well, the vast majority have said receptive to learning more from wherever their base point is. We've got some whizzes in the audience this evening, and thank you for the honest answers. So I think in a nutshell, but I'll hand over to Alison and Matt if they've got anything that they want to add. I think there's lots of equipment on farm. That's the first thing that you've told us. There's lots of things being recorded on farm, may vary between businesses. There potentially is more opportunities for data moving in order to help us analyse and drill down on what's happening on farm. Maybe need to get some more of the advisors asking for some more of that, for that data. And there's a willingness, you know, everybody's keen to, well, the vast majority of people are keen to know more. Guys, you got anything else that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think those results are very interesting in the respect of, you know, people actually are using it and things like that. But I would like to say that going forward, I think the hardest part of all this is actually getting the animals weighed and then getting them stored on your weigh heads. And then you've gone to all that, you know, that trouble. Use your data that you collect, and you know, there's always help out there. I know it is an ongoing sort of situation. There's for support, and there is support out there. So just reach out and get the support, and we can help you get your data. And it's not just using for treatment sort of things. It's like making management decisions within your enterprise as well. So, you know, if you're going to be selling early or selling too late and things like that. So there is help out there, but these, you know, and this just shows you the results are very interesting to see all the percentages that came out there. So it's been a really good sort of project from that point of view as well.
Yeah. Matt, anything you want to add?
I've got to say that, like you commented on, you know, when we calibrated some of these scales, it was surprising how many of we found were inaccurate, that people haven't calibrated them or didn't realise they were inaccurate, either through the frames or something being bent, let alone just not being set up correctly. So there's multiple reasons they could be inaccurate. I think it's very interesting in the surveys, you know, we all have to put EID tags in to move animals, and how many people are not taking advantage of using any of that data to look at anything.
Yeah. And just go back to that calibration thing, you know, the minor changes there could make massive decisions, couldn't they, as to whether animals are getting dosed or undosed in a project like this. So I know Matt was working with us, really, really important. So I think I've probably summed it up already, but we've talked this evening from a Smartsheet perspective of probably one of the, you know, a really cool way of integrating EID into our parasite control. But some of the basics are really important before we start, and there are ways of accessing support from a technical, even just setup perspective to set you off on your recording journey. Data recording does have a cost, and even notwithstanding the equipment, you know, the time to do it, and lots of, you know, you've told us lots of data that's being recorded. To realize the potential of that is to do that, we need to utilize that data. So even something simple like how to get it off your weigh head, or sharing it with your advisor, or even just sitting down and having a look at it yourself, can be really quite an important first step in realizing the potential of maybe a cost that you're already investing. And more data, whether it's treatments, daily live weight gain, movement records, when things are leaving your farm, all of that data means more discussion, and sharing it with your advisor might open lots and lots of discussions. So I think one for certainly the flocks that I work with on the project, you know, using lots of data, and EID can be a really crucial part of setting off on that journey. So just last thing that I wanted to signpost. So one of the things that came out of the project, and we've alluded to in this last section this evening, is some of the really fundamental things like calibrating weigh crates and setting up drafting, etc., and grass measurement, really important to achieve, you know, smart sheep. And it may be that you're not quite ready on your farm to implement a full TST project. However, some of the lessons that we've learned might be really useful in just sharpening up some of the bits and bobs that you're already doing on farm. So as we speak, we've launched a Smart Sheep YouTube channel, which features a whole box set of videos by lots of faces that you've seen here this evening, and the farmers that participated in the project. There's some cameos in there as well, so go and have a look, and if you know them, give them a suitable level of grief, and just to walk through some of the things that we've had to think about as part of the project. And we hope that they'll be useful even after this project has finished in helping you with using weigh crates and EID as part of your parasite control. So I'll open Fee and Claire. I think we're keeping an eye on the questions, and now is a really good opportunity if you have any questions for any of our speakers this evening to pop them in the Q&A session, and we've got all of our speakers field direct accordingly.
Yeah. Claire, have you found a good question to start, or do you want me to?
Yes, I think we could start. I think the order they were written was quite good, I suppose.
Well.
But maybe we should start with the question who was asking a bit more detail on how we calculate the treatment decision. You know, if we could elaborate and explain a little bit the weight per day, do we look at average group weight, etc. So maybe Fiona, you can explain a bit more on that one.
Try and answer that one. So thanks very much for your question. So when we're looking at the TST, we are looking at an individual animal weight. It's worked out on the previous weight of an animal. So we record that. The weight of the animal helps to identify how much food they could intake. So from that, we can infer roughly the size of their gut and therefore how much food they would be able to intake, which allows us to then see what their predicted minimum weight gain target would be over, say, a 2-week period or a 4-week period. So that's why we would have the individual weight of each animal. Before we would want to apply the TST, we would then have a measure of the GRAS, and we can then upload that into the AgriIgnite system, and that will then download a predicted minimum target weight. I have to point out this isn't the weight that we expect your animals to grow at. Most of the animals in the trials that we've done are performing well above the minimum target weight. But this is saying if your animals can't reach this target, then that's when we think that there's a problem and therefore they should be treated. But if they can hit that minimum target weight, then they are performing, you know, given the food that's available, they are performing well. So hopefully that makes sense. It's an individual target weight over a short period of time that comes out as a weight gain target that they should be able to reach the next time you weigh them. Yeah, here we go.
And I suppose, Fiona, there is also a question about when we use the weight data, how many data points do we need for each sheep?
Yeah.
So I think you kind of answer that. But
yeah, so we would just start with one. If we can have one data point before you're going to implement the TST, probably, you know, a month before, 2 weeks before, 3 weeks before, something in that kind of 2 to 4 week period, and then an amount of GRAS measurement. But that can be, you know, as I think Linda said, it can be, you know, measuring on the side of your belly or something. It's just to know that you're not restricted food available. If there's restricted food available, then the weight target will reduce because you can't expect animals to grow well if they're facing a feed challenge, basically. So hopefully that makes sense.
Okay. And the next question, which flows a little bit from these two ones, is about the AgriIgnite app. Wanted to know if the app is available for anyone to use or not. So maybe Linda, you want to answer that one?
Yes, it's available to do the GRAS measurements. It will be a subscription-based model, and that's where this project has been leading to through Innovate UK. So if you get in touch with us, we can speak to you about it, not a problem.
Leading on to that question was a question asking, what is the next step for rolling out the smart chip technology to the industry? So I think maybe Fiona, as a leader of that Innovate UK, what can we say about that?
I am hopeful that we are now getting towards a stage that we could think about rolling it out. I think there, you know, we've alluded to the challenges. I think some of the challenges are that there's a difficulty sometimes in the compatibility of different types of technology on farm and how well they link into each other. And I think that we need training and support to be able to do that. I think that our farmers are very, very skilled in a huge number of areas already, and being highly skilled in technical compatibility is just something that shouldn't really be required. So I would like to see that we could move forward in a place where the challenge that we've found about getting things working together could be overcome easily to make this work. But I think we've shown that the AgriIgnite system itself can work, and we can link it all in with the different systems that are on farm. I would like it to be even easier, that we could literally press a button and do it without needing to upload and download things. But at this point, that was not possible. But it is something that we have been working towards with Datamars. So I think there's still a way to go, but I think we've shown in practice that it can be done. What does probably Matt could maybe come in and give his thoughts as well, being the supreme technical expert guru that he is.
Yeah, we have had a lot of challenges over our time to make it work. We definitely have ironed a lot of them out. I still think for the average farmer, there's a lot of training needed to get you on board and being able to. In the polls we were talking about downloading. Part of this project, next thing is to upload, and I would imagine if we run the same poll with an upload, we'd see a completely different results after that one.
Yeah.
I was just going to add as well, as an advisor, but as a vet in this project, I think I've learned a lot about the equipment, its capability, some of how to use it even at a rudimentary level, and I think there's a need for that as well, because in order to support the farmers that I work with on farm, or to ankle bite my farmers to give me data, then actually familiarity with that technology from my perspective is going to be really important to mean that I can ankle bite you to do it. So I think, you know, this technology has got incredible capability. Absolutely. But also understanding what it's capable of and how to get it out of it, I think, is a really important first start, even like you say, before we go full TST. So an important
Absolutely.
start.
Yeah. And can I just, somebody had asked, you know, the questions that we're asking, was it market research for Datamars? No, it wasn't really. It was market research in a way, but it's market research for us to be able to understand where you are as farmers, and then what next stages we can do to be able to, you know, so to how do we take it forward, basically. So those questions that Emily was asking are actually things that we can now address in future grant applications. And because we need to apply for funding to be able to do this, we need to show why we think things are important. And being able to say that, you know, we've had webinars, we've had members of the farming community discuss with us or show their feelings about certain questions, and then we can use that to say, well, we've shown that people have this, we've shown that they would like to know more, and we think this is how to do it, you know. So it was really for that way. I'm sure we've all been really interested, but it was really in a way of how we can try and keep this project moving and what else we need to be able to do, basically. So that was a good question to ask.
There is still, I think, 3 or 4 questions, so I don't know if we can try to go through them. Emily, you're our timekeeper. So one question, and maybe Leslie can answer that, is DEFRA being made aware of this equipment research in relation to the capital grants that they are consulting on?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer to that is yes. I mean, presumably people are referring there to the animal health and welfare pathway. And the answer is yes, but at the moment, obviously there's a capital grant scheme out there and that isn't to do with the pathway, but this will be something which is going to be discussed as things develop over the next year or two. So we will attempt to make sure that that they are kept up to date with that.
Okay. And there was another question. Oh, sorry, Matt.
Can I just comment on that? I was lucky enough on Monday as part of my Nuffield CSE to be able to go to the House of the Parliament. This is something I did discuss with some of the ministers that we had access to. But one of the biggest things, quite a few of us drummed home, as well as being able to give the equipment, would like to see more training and support. And DEFRA do say they are looking at that as well. So that was quite a positive thing to hear.
Yeah. And actually, leading on from that, Matt, I was asked to fill in a questionnaire from DEFRA about, you know, future funding and where it should go and those kind of things. And I did highlight that the technology is brilliant, but we need training and support on how to use it. So you never know. Hopefully, we'll get there.
There is a couple of questions about the longer term implication of the DST. So is there a risk that over time we increase pasture contamination? And did we see in the project more lamb requiring treatment, or is that just more treatment are required as the year progresses?
Yeah, so thanks for that question, Emily. So we have looked at the effect of pasture contamination in our fuel trial that we did at Morden, and we found that, as you would expect, the monthly treatment group had the lowest pasture contamination because you're treating, every animal every month. But the other 3 treatment groups actually didn't have any differences in pasture contamination. So just treating a small number of animals at each stage didn't affect, we didn't have massive increases in pasture contamination compared to treating at weaning or treating on the basis of clinical signs. So I don't think that's an issue. And we didn't see an increase in the proportion of animals that needed to be treated over the years. So I don't think that it's going to lead to a long-term, I don't think it'll be a short-term gain in that we can go for like a year or 2 with not treating very many animals, and then it keeps going and suddenly we're treating everybody. That wasn't what we saw over the 6 or 7 years of the trial that we did.
Okay, and maybe one last question. Did the project demonstrate an overall reduction in wormer use as shown in previous work?
Yeah, so
again, maybe you want...
Yeah, I can start. The farm advisors can probably come in here as well. We're still data crunching. As you can imagine, with 16 farms, we're getting there. Overall, I think there was a reduction in the number of wormers given compared to different strategies, but there may have been some where we actually treated a few more animals, but that was because we were, compared to what the previous systems had been, but those were maintaining the growth rates as well. So any of the farm advisors want to come in with what your views
are? I think overall, yeah, there was a reduction in wormer, but I think with one of mine, there may have been a slight increase, and that wasn't unexpected because it was one where the growth rates were very high and we were expecting them to be high, and we just raised the bar a little bit, so it wasn't a massive increase, but it was an improvement in performance for a little bit more than perhaps would have been. So it can work both ways depending on the farm. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, I think so.
I think, Phoebe, when we previously done it in the Monitor farm, I don't know about the figures for, as you say, you're crunching this year's figures, but I think we'd say 40% of memory.
Yeah,
so
that's what we
that's
saw.
Just as a guide.
Yeah, I think it seems to be fairly consistent, about 40 to 50%. Matt C.
I can't give you percentage figures for the 4 farms I was monitoring, but I know all of them checked their lambs more frequently, and the report back was they'd spent less or bought less volume of wormer. So I'm guessing they were worming individuals, probably more often, but overall they used less wormer for the group.
Yeah.
I think one of the important bits of feedback as well was that obviously we had some discussions with the farmers and we've had some feedback and really the degree of confidence in the approach across the board, really. I think most of our farmers, just with 1 year and just a few goes at it, were really very confident in the approach and getting used to it. So that was really, really useful.
Yeah, once they'd seen that the kit working together, and realised that the lambs that they weren't treating weren't going backwards, then they were more than happy to stick with it and target the ones that needed it and leave the ones that didn't.
Yeah, and some of the discussions it led us to in terms of lamb performance as well. I think we had 1 or 2 farms where perhaps the performance wasn't carrying on as they wanted, and it brought some other discussions to the fore as well. So it was using the data in a really constructive way.
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming to join us tonight. It's been really wonderful to have so much support and interest out there. Thank you for your questions, all really good, get us thinking as usual. And I agree, farmers do have so many hats to wear, and that's why we're wanting to be able to help you so that you don't have to add another whole new range of hats in terms of technology to try and make these things work. So I'd just like to finish by thanking all of the project participants, our collaborators on this project, and also all our farmers who helped us to do this, and funding from Innovate UK. I'd like to give a big virtual clap to Emily for organising. I think she's done a wonderful job, so thank you very much, Emily. And thanks to all our speakers and you guys for turning up. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your evening. And if you have any questions, contact us and have a wee look on the Smartsheet YouTube channel. Thank you.